Hi, my name is Charles Carson, and I'm Associate Professor of Musicology and Ethnomusicology at the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm thrilled to talk to you today about the contemporary opera, The Manchurian Candidate. Now, I'd like to start off by welcoming my opera newbies. If this is your first time, welcome. And I'd like to give you a few tips just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable your first time out. Even if you've been coming for a while, some of these tips you may find helpful as well. The first question I get is often about what to wear. Well, just be comfortable. It really doesn't matter. Again, we want to see you there, however you're gonna come. I would suggest I just let you know they can be kind of cold in the hall sometimes, so that's just a tip from an insider right there. The second is in terms of cost and like where to sit. Every seat in the hall is a good seat, so sit where you can afford. Even if you're up in the nosebleeds, you're going to be sitting right next to me, so don't worry. We're going to both have a great time there. The other thing I would normally answer questions about is the language. Well, in this case, the opera is in English, though we will have super titles projected just to help you follow along while they're singing. You should be able to follow the language just fine. Generally, in terms of etiquette, just be yourself, be comfortable, have fun. It's all about just getting together to see great work and great artists perform. And we're all there for that purposes. Now, some insider tips you might want to be aware of. The lines for the restroom could get very long during the intermission, so I would suggest scanning the synopsis to know like what's about to happen right before the intermission curtain comes down, so that you can pop up and head off to the restroom and beat some of the crowds. Beyond that, just enjoy yourself. It's a very relaxing evening, and if you see me there and you have any questions, please feel free to come up and ask. I'd love to talk to you. Now, I know the idea of contemporary opera can be a little scary for some of us, but let's put this in context. Some of the classic works of opera that you already love are in fact newer than you think. And if we just take the work of Puccini, for example, Tosca, 1900, that makes it a year younger than Schoenberg's Verklärte Nacht. And if we think about something like Turandot from 1926, it's younger than works like Rhapsody in Blue from 1924, or even the new music example par excellence, The Rite of Spring, 1913. So see, you already love some of the new music out there. Now, I know contemporary music in general can be quite scary, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of the questions I get and concerns that people share with me about new music are not insurmountable, right? So first of all, I understand that like contemporary musical language may appear scary or impenetrable for many people, especially newcomers. But I like to think of it as an opportunity for the composers. These new languages, dissonance or whatever, they allow composers a wider swath of possibilities when they're composing and sharing musical ideas. It enables people like Philip Glass to use minimalism to express really complex emotions without falling back on the cliches of like late romantic music. Or the way in which contemporary topics for operas don't feel maybe operatic. There's not kings and queens and stuff anymore, so what do we write about in contemporary opera? Well, to be fair, a lot of operas have always addressed contemporary topics. For example, Madame Butterfly is a commentary on US expansionism in the wake of the Spanish American War. Also, we think about new music in general, right? If you go and see it the first time, how do you know if it's any good? Well, remember, all music was once new. And I would remind you that Carmen failed at its premiere, right? So it sometimes takes time for audience to learn the new music and to understand kind of how it works. There's also the idea that vocal writing, contemporary vocal writing, I mean, especially maybe in English, doesn't feel operatic in the same way that maybe French or Italian does. Well, to be fair, the history of opera developed around these languages, in particular Italian. And so we have to kind of adapt stuff like English to fit. In the hands of great writers, it feels very natural and very fluent. So if you go and see the right opera and the composer is thinking of language in a new way, you can have new experiences of the language that could be maybe poetic or maybe very, very conversational. And maybe they switch between the two of those things, right? And then, of course, there's the big question, right? Opera staging. A contemporary opera staging often can be very aggressive or even seem like anti-audience. Maybe they have very odd settings or very odd costuming or whatever. But I think it's really interesting that the kind of things we find shocking today maybe won't be that shocking in the future. Same thing if we think about the past productions, the way in which things seem very commonplace for us now would have been quite shocking for audiences back in the day. And I'm thinking again of Carmen and the way she dressed and acted on stage, or even the famous Maledizione of Rigoletto. You would have had good Catholics crossing themselves in the audience just with the thought of this curse taking place in front of them on stage. So those were very shocking and trying moments in terms of productions, but now they feel very commonplace. So I invite us to take some time and give new opera a chance and see if it can grow on us the way these classics have. The Manchurian Candidate opera is based on a 1959 book by Richard Condon. It was a pretty popular book, as a bestseller, and it was considered to be a political thriller when it was remade into a movie in 1962 starring Frank Sinatra. This was probably the version that most people were familiar with, and you're probably familiar with yourself. The movie was then remade in 2004, starring Denzel Washington and Meryl Streep. So this is a common thread that people keep coming back to at various points, refashioning it around the Korean War or the Gulf War, and making it into a palpable political thriller. The original book, however, was a lot more satirical, was a lot more biting, and really critiqued bureaucracy and large government struggles. In the end, it's a good story because it centers around key characters and very tense, taut, real life events. And it's that realism of it that I think translates into a good contemporary opera. But like any good opera, the plot drives the action. This is a taut political thriller that focuses on the investigations of Ben Marco as he attempts to uncover the political machinations of Eleanor Iceland, who's attempting to use her son, Raymond Shaw, as a political tool to get her new husband, Senator Johnny Iceland, on the presidential ticket. Confused? Well, don't worry, it all unfolds pretty clearly, and the best operas make use of these great plot devices. Now, we're in luck in that we're getting to see a work by living composers and lyricists. Mark Campbell is a lyricist who's been working for decades in musical theater and opera and song. And he started as a librettist for musical theater, but eventually moved into opera and has written the libretto or the lyrics and the words for over 40 operas. Most notably, of course, besides today's opera, would be his collaboration with Kevin Putt's previous on Silent Night, which won the 2012 Pulitzer Prize. Now, Kevin Putt himself is an American composer, and we have the honor of having hosted him for a while when he was a professor here at UT. He has written a number of operas, including Silent Night and including Manchurian Candidate, and also The Hours, which was commissioned by the Met and eventually went on to be premiered there. He's most recently won a Grammy for his concerto Contact. And together, the Grammy and the Pulitzer and now these wonderful opera premieres and awards really have positioned him as one of the strongest voices in American classical music today. His style is very eclectic, and we're going to get to see this collaboration between this great librettist and this great composer on stage during this production. Now, the music of the piece is really starts from the drama. It starts from the libretto, as the composer says, and they sort of built out from there, and all the music is in service of that story. So you're going to hear a pastiche of styles as the composer needs to communicate things. You're going to hear the influences of stuff like Stravinsky or John Adams, Philip Glass, minimalism. You'll hear some jazz, some bluegrass. All of these things will come together to serve the story. And it's really this marriage of the libretto and the music that's really going to propel the drama forward. You'll hear singing styles that are very naturalistic, that sort of mirror the sort of militaristic style of speaking of some characters, but then those same characters will switch into a more lyrical and dramatic style of singing when they're dealing with the emotional elements. So all of these aspects of writing, whether it be the orchestral color and the sounds that are coming out of the orchestra, or whether it be the voices, are all used to serve the ultimate thriller aspect of the piece. In terms of organization, you'll hear this recurring E, ding, 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 that represents, well, E for Eleanor, but it represents the sort of tension, the sort of political intrigue that's always bubbling under the surface of every scene. And that will serve as the musical ostinato or recurring pattern that will organize the work. And you'll know exactly how to feel and how to think about each character because of the work that the orchestra is doing behind the scenes. So the orchestra effectively is its own character in that it communicates directly with you And this is something that goes back hundreds of years in operatic practice, all the way back to people like Wagner and Verdi. So taken together, the music, the orchestrations, the vocal writing, the vocal performances even, all are in service of the libretto, all in service of the drama. And this is a key aspect of Kevin Putz's style, especially on the operatic stage. Now, I'd like to offer a few key moments that I think will help you orient yourself as you're making progress through the piece. And here we'll focus on three. The first of which is the breakfast scene in the middle of Act 1. This is a breakfast scene between Eleanor Iceland and Senator Johnny Iceland, and it represents the banality of the sort of Machiavellian characters that you're watching on screen. You have he's practicing his speech for the upcoming convention. She's drinking tea and reading the newspaper, and you see the wheels churning in her brain. Vocally, she's singing this sort of style of singing that's drawn from the coloratura. It's very high and very flashy, and you recognize that this is her strong will. But musically, the orchestra is telling you that there's more at play here. So as she starts to unfold this idea that seems to occur to her in the moment of, we should have a party to welcome our son home, the orchestra, the music, is telling us that this is part of a larger plan, and we start to see all the pieces move into place that sets up this very dramatic, tense thriller. And it's a very stark contrast to the sort of quotidian nature of the scene.
Whatever you say, sweetheart.
And that's why our marriage is such a success.
Now, in contrast to that key moment, our second key moment sets up another couple. The beginning of Act 2, Josie and Raymond arrive back at his apartment. And these are really interesting parallels because you see the Icelands at home and you see the sort of energy and the sort of, again, the quotidian nature of their everyday life. And then you see this heightened emotional state when Josie and Raymond are together. They're young lovers. They've just sort of come back together after being separated for years. And this new love, and they finally feel that they're safe, that things are going to work out for them. But we know through subtle musical cues that everything is not exactly right. In fact, we've noticed the way the vocal writing, in which all of Raymond's lines sort of mirror and mimic Josie's lines, that he is in effect replacing his mother rather, with her in his sort of power arrangement, that he's in fact very susceptible and very, very fragile at this moment. And a key sort of slight dissonance enters underneath the end of the scene as we start to realize that the Copland-esque, if you will, harmonies and textures of the opening of the scene don't exactly tell the full story. It's a fascinating psychological turn in a very quick period, a very short period of time, and I think it's a very effective scene overall.
We are safe now.
Safe now.
Safe now.
With feeling.
Safe now.
Safe
out of harm's way.
Army of sails up there, not to worry. Not to be afraid. Whatever may have hurt us before, vanished in air.
Out of harm's way. You and I safe now. Out of harm's way. Never to be hurt again. Never to be hurt again. Safe. Safe.
Now, the final key moment is, in fact, the last scene, or which serves basically as a finale. And I'm not going to show you this scene because I think you need to sit in the action and really kind of let it wash over you as all the pieces of the puzzle finally click together. But I will say this. Notice how all the threads, right, all these individual stories of these individual characters that we've already outlined come together in this one place in time. This is the political rally that serves as the climax of the entire work. And musically, all the musical threads are tied together. Everything is serving the drama, just as both Campbell and Putz said they wanted to do when they wrote this work. It's a very taut moment. It's a very exciting and thrilling moment, but it's also a very dramatically and musically effective moment. Now, I'd like to take a moment just to talk about music and politics and that relationship. There's a long tradition of the relationship between those two things, and sometimes we often think of political music as the only music that contains politics. And of course, there's very clear examples of what we might think of as straightforward political music. I mean, all the way from the 1812 Overture with its sort of playing out the battle between Russia and France on stage, to contemporary pop music like Springsteen's Born in the USA, which has a very clear political statement or political message. But even an opera, take something like Tosca. Tosca begins with a rebel running into the church to seek refuge, and the rest of the plot is just basically trying to root out all the rebels that are hiding in Rome at the time. These are pieces that have more or less pretty straightforward political aspects to them, but there's also works that are political, but in softer ways. So we might think of Dvorak's New World Symphony and the political statement it's making towards Europe, claiming and demonstrating, I would argue, that the U.S. has its own rich cultural traditions that can be used much in the same way the European tradition has been used. You can also think of works like The Marriage of Figaro with its topsy-turvy world where the rich haves are undone by the servant class have-nots and hilarity ensues. So these are political aspects to music that are always present. Now, this work, of course, is more straightforward in its political statements, but it is by no means alone in doing so. It's part of a long tradition of this close relationship between music and politics. And some would argue that the best music does something, it says something. And if that's not political, I don't know what is. Again, thank you for joining me in this brief introduction to the Manchurian Candidate, an opera that I think is going to have a long life in the repertoire because of its continued relevance. It's a contemporary opera for contemporary times, and this upcoming production by the Austin Opera is thrilling, and I hope to see you there.
Hello?